Well, hello and welcome to my channel, The Withered Fig Tree. My name is Randy Silva, and I've been doing live streams about the importance of the Holy Spirit in the lives of Christians. And I've been doing a series called The Seven Spirits of Revelation, and it's about the book of Revelation. And believe it or not, there is a lot of the Holy Spirit's presence in the book of Revelation as a direct player in that role. This is going to be the 11th part. So we've been going through the book of Revelation, really chapter by chapter, just about. I wasn't really anticipating doing that, but this is part 11. It's going to be about the beast out of the earth and the Lamb and the 144,000. So let's go ahead and get started. Last week I talked about the woman and the dragon, and the woman was Israel and the dragon is Satan. It says that specifically, and how Israel was a conduit or a channel through which God could give birth to himself. And the Messiah completed his mission and was then snatched back up into heaven. But then the beast was free to go after and engage with the woman, who is Israel. And it talked about how the woman was able to flee to the wilderness. We talked about how that wasn't actually fleeing anywhere, it was staying in the land. But this idea of the wilderness being protected for 40 years while they wander around. In this case, they're wandering around, hopefully finding the new covenant. Yes, so the beast was then free to engage with the woman after this period of protection. And sure enough, we see the Roman Empire move in 66 AD. Now, the first part of chapter 13, which is what we ended with last week, that shows the behind the scenes of this spiritual battle that is going on behind the scenes of the physical battle, which is what we observe as humans. Now, I wanted to talk about this slide here. So this is a little bit of a review, but also some additional information from last week. One thing I didn't point out was a change in the vantage point that you see in Revelation chapter 12. Revelation 12 and going forward has a different feel to it. The reason is because it changes. Now, one thing that doesn't stop is the Revelation continues to be about Israel. Before chapter 12, what you see is the vision speaking to Israel, covenant language, all the way up from the 7 seals and then the 7 trumpets. Israel is the primary covenantal subject. But what you see in Revelation 12 is that Israel becomes the object of explanation rather than the addressee. Revelation 12 marks the transition from covenant subject to covenant context. And here now you see that the woman, who's Israel, is no longer being warned or corrected, but now she is being explained, or her purpose or her role are being explained. At the same time, the vision begins to speak directly to those who have already crossed over into the new covenant. So that's kind of the big shift that you see in Revelation 12 and going forward, is the vantage point is now more and more to the new covenant church. What you will see here is more and more language that sounds like the book of the Lamb, endurance, testimony, patience, faithfulness. When those types of terms appear, then the text starts to address those who belong to the Lamb in the new covenant. And one of the things you'll see is that at the very end of Revelation 12, yes, so the idea though is that this transition means that when you start seeing the commandments, or you start seeing the voices from heaven start talking, then this is a transition from talking directly to the Jews, to whom God then had to inflict judgment and condemnation on for the rejection of the new covenant, which really is a continuance of the old covenant. If you think of the old covenant as prophesying this new covenant that was to come, and sure enough, it came. A little bit about the very end of the first section of chapter 13. It says, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Starting in verse 8, what you see is that it's not redefining who God's people are. Instead, it's clarifying that it's the Roman Empire, which was, vast from Spain all the way to the east in Iran, what is now Iran in modern day times. So that's the physical span of the beast, but there are people who are now appearing that do not belong to the earth anymore, and those are the people of the new covenant. And those are the people who can no longer belong to any nation, not just Rome, but Christianity. Those who are under this new covenant are now in God's kingdom on earth, so they no longer belong to those kingdoms. So that's why these are the people who cannot worship the beast, because they're not a part of the world anymore. They're no longer actually citizens of Rome, even though they may be citizens of Rome. Spiritually, they are a part of this new plan, which is written about in the Lamb's Book of Life. So that all has to do with the idea that the vantage point is changing. Now you can see that who is it that calls for patient endurance? Who has to have patient endurance? Patient endurance is required because the beast's authority is temporary. So the earth has to go through this phase, and everybody who's in it, including now Christians. The patient endurance is required by the Christians. So you can see, again, that this has to do with this vantage point changing. That ends this section of the beast out of the sea. Interesting. The idea is that there's interesting covenant courtroom language. This whole section in verse 9, whoever has ears, let them hear. And then this idea that the vantage point is now changed. And so the people who are being called to endure patient faithfulness, that is now the Christians. So then you see the beast out of the earth. So this is what we'll talk about today. In verse 11 it says, then I saw the second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword, yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image be killed. It's very interesting language, difficult to read. But the first and second beast, so you have the beast of the sea is the first beast, the second beast is the beast of the earth. So the first beast is the spiritual background to what is giving Rome its power, and that is Satan, the dragon. The second beast, the beast that comes out of the earth, is one that is now a physical army, Rome itself. That is sort of, you can think of it as like a puppet to Satan. The second beast is the actual beast, the physical presence of the Roman Empire, Rome's army on the earth taking over the earth, and then here giving justice and condemnation to the Israelite people who refused the new covenant, refused to recognize the end of the old covenant, and the new covenant starts. If we make some points just out of this text here, that's from verse 11 to verse 18. It's interesting, as I'm reading all this, I'm reminded of how I used to look at this, and perhaps maybe a second horizon of how it could be looked at in terms of future standpoint. We'll get to that later on in this series. Without applying the lens of what these symbols mean, then you can get it to say some pretty strange things. Here, though, if you come at it with the lens that the beast is the Rome and its power, its strength, its army, then the idea of this beast who is wounded by the sword and yet lived, the second beast was given power and given breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship its image to be killed. So it sounds like really crazy language, but what we had talked about, how Nero was the horn that had been wounded, but then the wound had healed. And so here you see this same idea. You see, it ordered them to set up an image in honor of him who was wounded. So that symbolizes Nero. And then you had this year of 3 other emperors, but then you see the 4th emperor in 69 AD come up as Vespasian. And so he now has been given power, given birth, all the power of the first beast, but now he can go out and focus, I guess you could say, on the people of Israel. This idea that it forced all people great and small, to have this mark on their right hands or foreheads, that does give, modern day mysterious view. If you look at this, maybe being like a computer chip, put under your skin, or some sort of digital currency. Not saying that those things all couldn't actually come to fruition at some point, but in terms of what this text is talking about, this has to do with whenever you have a mark on your forehead, it's an idea of ownership, or sometimes the book of Revelation we use the word somebody's name is written on their forehead. So it's not talking about these guys getting computer chips or anything like that, or modern day people doing that either. It's talking about people who are either accepting Rome as authority. Okay, and then talk about this idea that the beast looks lamb-like but speaks like the dragon. Its appearance mimics its legacy, tradition, and piety, but its voice aligns with satanic purposes, making deception its primary weapon. A large percentage of this presence of the book of Revelation and the apocalypse in modern society is just about everybody, Christian or not, knows that 666 is the number of the beast. And it's basically become analogous to the book of Revelation itself. It stems from this verse 18 in chapter 13. It says, "This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. So it goes all the way through this power coming from Satan into the beast, into various horns of that beast, and then coming out and just singling out the beast who started all this. And that is, I believe, Nero. And this isn't a brand new idea, but I believe it's the one that makes the most sense. And it comes from this idea that if you use this idea of gematria, which is applying numbers to characters, whichever language we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about Hebrew. And then doing some sort of arithmetic on it. Typically, it's summing. So in the case of the Hebrew language, you assign these numbers. So it's not just like, if it's a Z, that's 26. If it's a Y, that's 25. It's not like that. It's these particular numbers that have values that were assigned to them in the apocalyptic scheme. And so if you look at the Hebrew here, Neron Kaiser, which is it's his name and his title. That's why some people don't believe this, because it's like, why do you have to put in his title? Well, I believe that's because that's who he was. It wasn't just that this guy was Nero, but he was a Caesar, the craziest of the Caesars, who ended up committing suicide. If you go through and follow this apocalyptic scheme on those letters, the Hebrew letters for Nero Kaiser, then you will end up with this number 666. Now, the number 666 has a crazy amount of paranoia and ominous sound to it. The number 666 itself, in modern day, makes even people who don't believe in the Bible, but they know about it, like, oh my gosh, that's Satan. Or if they're more inclined to worship Satan, then they want this symbol on them somehow. But the number 666 itself would have just been, it wouldn't have had that type of a story behind it when it was first used. But the Jews in that first century would have recognized this as not just this gematria that points to this name, but that it happens to be one short of perfection, this number 6, 3 times over. Not only does this number sum and point to Nero, but it points to this satanic spirit that was behind him. Partly the symbol, the number, is the signature of Nero Kaiser. The other part is that number happens to indicate that he is in allegiance with Satan. It's a totally different view, though, of what people might think in modern times, where they might be afraid for this number, that it represents something that's going to go into our skin or into our foreheads or something like that. I'm not saying that those things may or may not happen, but it won't be because of what Revelation was saying about Nero. It won't have that same kind of number 13 type of thing that number 13 has to our modern day vernacular. The next section is in the NIV, has the title "The Lamb and the 144,000." I put again because this is the third time that they've shown up or been talked about. And if you recall, they were a symbol of those who were saved under the Old Covenant, and they were sealed before the Old Covenant totally ended. Thereafter, you can only be saved under the New Covenant. So partly you see them showing up again in the vision to show that God has not forgotten those who were sealed under the Old Covenant. There's all this condemnation and justice has gone out, but don't worry, those who were saved under the Old Covenant are still sealed. They're still there. And it says in verse 1, "Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads." So again, instead of having 666 on their forehead, they have God's name. "And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and the peal, and like a loud peal of thunder." Again, that means that God is about to say something or God has shown up. "The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. They sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed of the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remain virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from all mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. I read all that because it does sound strange. Some things you can see have to be symbols. So, for instance, it talks about those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remain virgins. So, if that was taken literally, it would mean these are people who were virgins, and that's not who the 144,000 were. The 144,000 are those who were saved under the old covenant. And so these are symbolic. These are not literal. So what this actually shows, this idea that they did not defile themselves with women, is covenant language, not a sexual commentary. So he's not saying these people were virgins. He was saying they were virgins spiritually. They were all spouses to God under the old covenant. The idea is that their allegiance was to God. And then women here represent rival religious systems, not individuals. Throughout the Old Testament, Israel's participation in idolatry or pagan worship is framed as adultery or prostitution. So John is drawing from that same prophetic vocabulary. Sorry that women is symbolic of that or associate. Sorry to the women of today, but the idea is that when it's talking about things like fidelity or women, they are, and virgins, they are symbolic of their covenant loyalty. So the point is not that they are abstinent, but that they had undivided allegiance. And that's why they are first fruits to God and the Lamb. So these people now become the very first members of God's new kingdom in heaven, the first members from the old covenant. Obviously, somebody can't die in the new covenant until the new covenant started. So these people who have died under the old covenant, or died even in this period from 30 to 70 AD, they die under the old covenant, and those who are saved under the old covenant is who these 144,000 are. And then obviously it's not that they never lie. This is verse 5. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. So it's not saying that in order to be one of these 144,000, which it's not even saying that that's the literal number either. It's talking about a multitude of people who are Israelites, who are followers of the old covenant and saved under the old covenant. It's not that they didn't lie or ever lie. This is like courtroom language, and their mouths are clean because their witness is true, not because they never sinned or told a lie or misspoke. So that is what these sections are talking about. Rome, the beast out of the sea, physical Rome's army, and being able to inflict damage. And then the Lamb and the 144,000, again, not forgotten by God, saved under the old covenant, sealed by God himself. They are now protected. So now where is Revelation going to go from there? Now that this part of the story is complete, well, we see a lot more symbols that we'll talk about next week, like the three angels and the harvesting of the earth and the trampling of the winepress. So again, thanks for joining me today. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a great evening.